It is worth noting that my wife sent me an email rather than writing to me in person. I believe her email program automatically recommended my name as the recipient and she clicked on it without checking. This is a relatively simple task, especially if one is in a hurry. In any case, after 18 years of marriage, I was surprised to receive a note from my wife titled, "About yesterday." Given that Wednesday was a relatively unremarkable day, I was curious as to why one of them had emailed me about it. Upon opening the message, I read, "Dear, I just wanted to remind you how beautiful yesterday was. You made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. I simply can't wait for next week. Your attractive lady." I worked all day on Wednesday, and as far as I knew, I was in. We did not even chat on the phone that day. However, Furthermore, she exhibited unusual cheerfulness upon returning home in the evening. Additionally, I had never bestowed upon her endearing nicknames such as "sexy lady." The situation's gravity was immediately apparent, and my initial inclination was to confront her that evening and demand an explanation. Individuals are more inclined to confess, but I am a prudent and meticulous person. It was not difficult to foresee that she would dispute the letter's significance. One could posit an alternative rationale or simply dismiss it as a jest. What could I say in such a scenario? My baseless accusations would have alerted her, and I was unlikely to gain any insight after much reflection. I elected to wait. It would be intriguing, even amusing, to observe, but then she realized her mistake and decided to explain herself to me. If not, I was forewarned and could utilize the knowledge regarding her in the future. Sales meeting, real estate. Her typical work schedule is not predictable. This evening, she arrived home considerably later than I did. I kept a close eye on her, but her conduct was perfectly regular. If she was aware that the letter had been sent by mistake, she did not show any signs of this knowledge. I did not indicate that something was wrong. The rest of the evening proceeded as planned. However, when we went to bed, I was unable to fall asleep. Instead of sleeping, I lay there examining my dilemma from every perspective, hoping to figure out whether I could untangle the knot. Of course, there was still the potential of a completely benign explanation. If that were the case, not only would I have embarrassed myself by acting rashly, but I would have also jeopardized our marriage. I adore my wife, and the last thing I wanted was to do something that would push her away. If the letter revealed that my wife was continuing her affair, my marriage was already in jeopardy. I would need to take action, even though I strive to manage my emotions. The grief of my wife's probable betrayal gripped me tightly. After much thought, I realized that my only alternative was to postpone dealing with the issue until I could acquire more reliable information. I elected to postpone further action until I could obtain more reliable information. Fortunately, I was able to do so, and as soon as I realized it, I retired for the night. When I returned to work the next morning, I resumed my analysis of the situation. The following Wednesday was expected to bring some answers, so I contacted the detective agency and arranged for them to follow my wife, even if she did nothing extraordinary. On Wednesday, my anxieties would not be totally alleviated, but I would definitely feel better. However, if my suspicions were correct, I would at least know the truth and could begin taking proper measures. After doing everything I could at the time, I put the matter aside and returned to work. As it turned out, the next Wednesday was much like any other day, and I went to work and returned home late in the evening. Her appearance and demeanor were unremarkable. I sat in my office reading my favorite collection of Edgar Allan Poe stories, attempting to conceal any indications of concern or skepticism. On Thursday morning, I had a meeting with the detective agency to discuss the findings of their surveillance. While I am not particularly emotional, I possess the ability to discern emotions in others. Upon entering the office, I observed that the detective responsible for my case avoided making eye contact with me. I immediately discerned that the information he was about to divulge would be unfavorable. It corroborated my suspicions that my wife had departed from the real estate office where she was employed and subsequently met with an unidentified male individual at a low-cost motel in close proximity to the airport. The detective provided me with photographic evidence of her meeting with the aforementioned male and entering a room with him. The time stamp on the photograph was 13:52, and another photograph taken almost 2 hours later showed them exiting the room together holding hands. I expressed my profound regret that the detective was unable to confirm my suspicions. I then inquired as to what assistance I could require at this time. After a brief pause, I requested the detective's assistance once more, noting that the motel appeared to be their regular gathering point. If this were indeed the case, I asked whether it would be possible to photograph the interior of the room. The detective did not hesitate to inquire about the nature of the activities occurring within the room. Our team possesses considerable expertise in gathering such evidence. It is likely that we will need to negotiate with the motel management for their cooperation. However, if that is agreeable to you, I believe we can ensure that the project will be completed. I nodded, indicating my understanding. I returned to my office, but to my astonishment, I was unable to concentrate on my work. All doubt had been removed. My capacity for critical thinking appeared to have vanished. I eventually ceased attempting to work and focused on the information I had learned. I wiped my eyes. I began making arrangements and confirming my wife's infidelity. I realized why he had unintentionally sent that treacherous email to me rather than to him. It turns out I knew her lover. He was our neighbor, Mark Bradshaw. My name is Mac Bishop, therefore, the email computer must have suggested it and entered the first two letters. It was quite negligent of her not to double-check. However, emotions can distract lovers, and knowing the name of N's partner heightened my feelings of betrayal. Mark and his wife Bobby were our acquaintances. We frequently dined at one another's homes and went to the movies together. I'd never seen a specific. The spark between them was either diluted or both adept at deception. I knew I had to take action, but I was unsure of the exact course of action to take. For several hours, I considered various potential courses of action. At times, thoughts of vengeance crossed my mind, followed by scenarios in which I begged them not to leave. Questions about how the affair began and how long it had been going on tormented me. I was simultaneously angry and I was overcome with a sense of pity. Finally, I made my decision. I not only knew what I wanted to achieve, but I also had a well-thought-out strategy for getting there. My campaign would include two independent courses of action that would be carried out simultaneously. I viewed them as a two-pronged approach, part of the divisive phase of my strategy. I would separate the two loves and reclaim her heart. I would utilize my understanding of and to a lesser extent, Mark, to achieve this. If circumstances permit, I will attempt to create a rift between them. This may allow me to intervene and ultimately end their relationship. The second phase of my campaign will focus on winning her back and demonstrating to her the potential for a fulfilling relationship with me. I will also highlight the benefits of renewing their relationship. I have taken extensive notes on potential activities for each aspect of my campaign, including calculations. I recognized that their timing and the devising of interactions so that they would complement one another were crucial elements of my campaign. I understood that maintaining his ignorance of their affair was essential for both of them. This would undoubtedly necessitate restraint on my part, but I believed I could handle it. I am adept at masking my feelings. I decided not to launch my campaign until I received the next report from the detective agency. However, there were things I could do in the meantime to prepare. In the interim, I procured a recording system for our home phones and a voice-activated recording device, which I concealed in N's car. I monitored our home phone to cover the channel of communication. While I was unable to tap into her mobile phone, I reasoned that the car was the most probable location for me to call Mark. I was unconcerned about her calling in from work because the agency had an open-plan workplace. I presumed that she would be unlikely to discuss matters with her lover in an environment where she might be easily overheard. My subsequent action was to gain access to the NS email account, which our home computer was already configured to access. She had password-protected her system, but I was aware of the location of her password list, enabling me to obtain access rapidly. I soon arranged for copies of all emails sent to my address to be sent to me. The email indicated that the affair had lasted approximately 1 month, suggesting that the relationship was still in its honeymoon phase. My objective was to expedite this phase. After completing the preliminary work, my remaining task was to await the detective agency's preparation of the images for their next appointment. Additionally, I was surprised by the delivery of both video and audio. I was prepared for an unfavorable outcome. I observed the couple engaging in sexual intercourse. What I had not anticipated was the sensitivity and, perhaps, love between them. The intensity of their connection caused me distress. It made me question the likelihood of success of my strategy. However, I had nothing to lose, so I proceeded with the plan. My wife is impatient and takes disappointment harshly. I intend to exploit her vulnerability in order to disrupt the relationship she has with Mark. At the same time, she is incredibly romantic. I believe this might be used for the other part of my strategy. Having copies of all of her communications provided me with an undeniable advantage when it came to developing my intervention strategy. Their next exchange of messages provided me with everything I needed to begin implementing part of my strategy. I inquired about their plans for the following Wednesday, inquiring about the same time and location. I was eager to hear their response. On the day of their next meeting, I drove to his office and parked around the corner to stay on site as soon as she came back from lunch. I entered the building and proceeded to the office where he was waiting. I proceeded to casually walk by her parking place, ensuring that no one was observing, and crouched next to her car. It took me a mere moment to unscrew the tire's valve cap and release the air. I then returned to my car and drove back home, pondering what she would do if there were no men in the office to assist her. As anticipated, approximately 20 minutes before her scheduled meeting with Mark at the motel, she contacted me. She inquired as to whether I could assist her. I reassured her that I could and that I would be able to fix her car, provided that I could finish up at work. I informed her that I would be leaving within approximately 15 minutes. She waited by her car at her agency until nearly the time of her meeting with Mark. I apologized for being late. I apologized, and explained that the repair took longer than anticipated due to her distress. I methodically and slowly changed the tire, stopping just behind her car to load the flat tire into the trunk. I advised her to place the vehicle in the trunk and take it to a repair facility, which also prevented her from departing until I had completed the tire change. It was more than an hour after the scheduled meeting time when I had installed the spare tire and returned after washing my hands. I apologized once more for the delay and expressed my hope that it would not affect her connection. In regard to the client, it was sufficient for her to comprehend that such occurrences are not uncommon. During the tire change, I heard her phone ring on numerous occasions, yet she did not answer. It is likely that she was aware of Mark's calls but chose not to respond in my presence. My concerns were subsequently validated. Upon returning to my office, I observed a tense interaction between the two. Mark inquired as to her whereabouts, noting that he had been waiting at the motel for over an hour. He suggested that she might have called to inform him of the situation. I informed him that I had rented a room and that Mark Mack was present, as he was assisting with the flat tire. I advised Mark that I was unable to speak with him in his presence. I surmised that I had disrupted their plans for the evening, following the evening meal. I escorted her to the couch and massaged her feet as she sat on my lap. She looked at me with a puzzled expression, as though she was typically required to ask me for this. I informed her that I was aware she had experienced a challenging day and that I had simply wished to do something nice for her. She regarded me with a certain degree of ambiguity, as though she was attempting to discern whether I was making a romantic overture. However, as I continued to administer the foot massage and repose on the couch, I observed a noticeable shift in her demeanor. Her countenance became radiant, and her soft exhalations of contentment resonated like a symphony in my ears. To avoid any appearance of undue haste, I bided my time, awaiting the conclusion of the session. In the week preceding Monday, a substantial floral arrangement was delivered to her office, accompanied by a card that addressed her as the epitome of a wife. If she felt any guilt about my irony, she did an admirable job of concealing it. However, when she arrived home that evening, she greeted me sincerely and expressed the other women in the office were astonished. What, they wanted to know, was the occasion for this unexpected display of affection. I replied that I had never done anything like this before. Absolutely correct, darling, I said, embracing her. That is what I want to change. I then asked her to consider a hypothetical situation. What if she had had a flat tire while traveling along the highway? This made me realize how much I am grateful for your affection. I wanted to ensure you were aware that she glanced at me, searching for Lee. However, after a moment of uncertainty, she held me firmly. That is very kind of you, sweetheart. It means a great deal to me. I could not help but wonder if she felt remorseful about her emails. I discovered that the lovers intend to, in order to make up for lost time, a special encounter was scheduled for a few days later. The intention was to hinder the other party's actions, but there was a concern that interfering with the vehicle in question might raise suspicions. Therefore, the decision was made to allow the other party to attend the meeting without any interference. However, to avoid being spotted when she entered the room, a decision was made to follow her from a distance. Mark had isolated himself. I proceeded to drive behind the motel and entered via a side door. The motel was of a sufficient size that there were no surveillance cameras to record me, so the fire alarm in the corridor was triggered. I waited outside until I noticed the visitors being herded to a safe area in the parking lot. I did not see Mark or. However, I was aware that they were among the crowd. I was likely as perplexed as the other employees when I observed the exchange of emails between the two distressed individuals. I was infuriated by the situation and could have shouted, "Mark, I'm sorry, but I did not cause this problem. In the future, choose a location that is not a fire hazard." "Hazard," I replied, "that does indeed sound like my guy." Upon her return from work, I observed that she was still visibly upset. However, her demeanor shifted abruptly when she noticed that the dining table was set with linen napkins and exquisite china. As she caught the aroma of her favorite recipe boiling on the stove, she glanced at me with a hint of skepticism. "I am uncertain as to your identity and the circumstances that led to your assuming the role of my husband. I am curious as to the particulars of this transformation," she inquired, her demeanor displaying a blend of amusement and inquiry. In response, I offered a humble reply. "I simply contacted your office this afternoon and was informed that you had a delayed meeting with a customer. I assumed that cooking might not be your preference when you returned home." A sudden look of apprehension crossed her face. Her demeanor shifted, yet she recovered swiftly and embraced me. "That's quite lovely of you, sweetie," she said. "You treat me so well after dinner." I decided not to let her assist with the dishes. She expressed gratitude as I led her into the living room and initiated her preferred television program. I then returned to the kitchen. I observed her observing me and realized that the initial stages of my campaign were progressing well. Despite my initial reservations about her infidelity, the subsequent email I intercepted from Mark made it evident that no temporary setbacks would deter him. He was eager to resume his relationship with my wife and was willing to take the necessary steps to do so. Mark was willing to go to great lengths to obtain it. I had previously stayed in inexpensive motels, but this time I was staying in a luxurious hotel. I had the option of staying in the Hyatt, which would allow us to spend quality time together. I was displeased with Mark's tenacity and regretted that the situation was prolonging. It became apparent that other solutions were necessary in order to resolve the situation. I proceeded to contact the Hyatt reservation desk at noon the day before the scheduled meeting. I informed them that I had made a reservation for the following day, but that unforeseen circumstances had arisen, and I would no longer be able to attend. I explained that I needed to cancel the reservation, and the clerk assured me that this would not cause any issues. The clerk responded, "Actually, we have a large conference scheduled, and your cancellation will greatly assist us." I smiled with pleasure at having done my part. I couldn't resist showing up at the Hyatt to see what happened. I sat in a chair overlooking the reception area and hid behind a newspaper. Sure enough, the romantic couple arrived precisely on time, walking hand in hand, conversing and singing like doves. The couple arrived precisely on time, walking hand in hand and conversing and laughing like doves. However, their initial enthusiasm was short-lived, as they quickly discovered that they had no room. Mark informed the confused clerk that he had reserved a room a few days ago. The clerk apologized, but according to the hotel's computer system, there was no record of a reservation. "Your reservation has been cancelled." "That is rather absurd," Mark stated. "Indeed," the clerk replied. "However, I have already made a new reservation." The clerk then proceeded to inform Mark that the hotel was fully booked. She explained that the convention in town was the reason for the hotel's full occupancy. Furthermore, she informed Mark that many other prominent hotels in the area were also booked out. She might be able to find a motel close to the airport. Her cheeks became hot and she tightened her fists as Mark continued to yell at the counter. She tugged aggressively on his sleeve, saying, "Never mind. She has spoken loudly. Let's get out of here. I'm not in the mood for those words." She then turned and marched into the parking lot. He then proceeded to follow her, attempting to pacify her and offer alternative solutions. However, it was evident that he was not succeeding. I waited until they had both departed in their respective vehicles before vacating my seat in the lobby. Upon returning home that evening, I was overcome with joy. I intercepted her at the door and advised her not to pursue the matter further. Upon entering, I promptly departed, thereby circumventing any potential objections. I escorted her to my vehicle and held the door open for her. I circumvented the vehicle and proceeded to enter the driver's seat. She inquired about the purpose of our journey. I surmised that she would receive a modest surprise that evening. I informed her of this, smiling, and then proceeded to turn. On the radio, gentle music played as I drove in silence. She regarded me with interest, attempting to predict what I had planned. She grew visibly nervous when she saw me enter the high-rise parking lot. "Why are we heading here?" she asked, her voice cautious. I gave her a reassuring wink as I entered the hotel elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. I pressed the button for the top floor, and we were soon in the Hyatt rooftop restaurant, which features its trademark revolving dome. I approached the Mercedes-Benz and informed the driver of my name. He replied, "Right on time," and proceeded to take us to a table on the outskirts of the restaurant where we could enjoy the view of the city lights. I inquired about the rationale behind his choice of location. "This location is somewhat unconventional. There is no specific rationale behind it. I simply believed that it would be an ideal setting for my wife." She acknowledged my compliment with a somewhat nervous expression, "But I am curious as to how you managed to secure us a table." I had heard that there was a significant convention in town today, which posed no problem. I spoke in a relaxed manner, stating that I had called earlier to make a reservation. Furthermore, they did not respond to my feedback. However, I was aware that my success was in stark contrast to Mark's failure. In fact, I reserved the table as soon as I learned of their meeting intentions. I then proceeded to order. I continued, "I hope you do not mind." She expressed her gratitude for my thoughtfulness and calmed her excitement when the waiter she was provided with a bucket of ice and a bottle of champagne, which visibly brightened her mood. After we made numerous toasts in her honor, she was delighted when the server served oysters on the half shell. While I am not a particularly enthusiastic oyster eater, I do enjoy them as a main course. The server then served a niçoise salad with salmon and black olive sauce, which I found impressive. "I assumed you would order." She then requested something substantial, such as a large steak, and expressed her satisfaction with this choice. I informed her that I was aware of her fondness for salads and that we should avoid overeating. She then inquired about dessert, but I did not elaborate further. The waiter then presented 2 bowls of fresh raspberries with whipped cream and glasses of Grand Marnier, which was the ideal conclusion to the meal and greatly enjoyed. On the return journey, she unbuckled her seat belt and snuggled up to me. It appeared that the wine and oysters had the desired effect. Furthermore, I surmised that she was both disappointed and aroused by the failures of her recent dates when I arrived home. I immediately escorted her upstairs to her bedroom. I recommended that she change into her nightgown. I proceeded to the wardrobe and hastened down the hall to the guest bedroom to ascertain the state of affairs. Upon my return, I was gratified to observe that she had selected a sheer black nightgown that both concealed and revealed the outlines of her figure. I then led her down the hall to the guest bedroom, where perfumed candles now illuminated the area surrounding the open bed. She was astonished by my preparations. I approached from behind and blindfolded her. "Tonight, you will rely on your senses of touch and smell," I explained as I led her to the bed and began undressing her. I then placed her on the fresh linen sheet. "Do you smell this?" I inquired, wafting a bottle of almond oil beneath her nose. I then poured some oil into my palms. I proceeded to warm the area and began rubbing her legs. She vocalized pleasure as I provided a light massage to her legs. However, I did not linger in this position. Instead, I began working upward, focusing on her calf and my muscles to ensure she was completely relaxed. I observed her buttock tense with expectation, and as I reached her fingertips, I delicately flipped her onto her stomach and continued. The process continued up her back, with the application of firm pressure to her buttocks and back muscles. This continued until she vocalized her pleasure once more. I then proceeded to engage in sexual intercourse with her at a rapid and forceful pace. Her vocalizations transitioned from groans to a prolonged scream, which was echoed by my own vocalization. We both reached a state of orgasm simultaneously, followed by a period of relaxation. I then removed the blindfold from her eyes and pulled away. The blindfold was removed from her face, and her eyes were closed. It appeared that she had either fainted or slumped from weariness while taking a deep breath. I proceeded to scoop her up, carry her into the bedroom, and place her on the bed. I then covered her with a sheet, and she promptly fell asleep. I immediately washed up with a sponge in the sink before retiring to bed and falling asleep. I was gratified by the outcome of the evening. I typically sleep in and have multiple wake-up times for work, but the following morning, she awoke early and prepared coffee and breakfast for me. When I looked at her, I observed that her eyes were bright. She thanked me and commented that the previous night had been special for her. I replied that I was pleased she had enjoyed it. I expressed my enjoyment, and she replied that she would remember it for a long time. I sensed that I was nearing the conclusion of the interaction and making genuine progress. However, later that same day, I intercepted an email exchange that informed me that Mark was still attempting to meet up with her. I apologized to Mark for what had happened the previous day at the Hyatt. I was still unsure of the circumstances surrounding the incident. The hotel lost my reservation. Perhaps it was not meant to be. Mark, do not suggest that the attractive woman allow me to make it up to you. Is there any possibility you could get away on Saturday? Bobby is out of town, so we can spend the day at our lake house. There were no scheduling conflicts or fire alarms, it was simply a matter of personal preference. Mark always plays golf on Saturdays. I could probably go away while I am eager to experience your exceptional presence once more. It became evident to me that my campaign had reached a pivotal point. I sensed that both divide and conquer were gaining traction, but I needed to act promptly this weekend to avoid losing everything I had achieved thus far. Their new plans posed a significant challenge for me. Canceling my golf game was not an option. I could always feign an interest in shopping or suggest another activity. I was reluctant to tamper with her vehicle again, as she might become suspicious and lose everything. Unlike a motel or hotel, it was challenging for me to influence Mark's lake house. I sought a way to alter her plans, ideally at the last minute. Suddenly, an excellent idea occurred to me. I was the ideal candidate for this role. Furthermore, it simply required one phone call to prepare. I continued my usual routine until the end of the week. However, on Friday evening, I secretly took my mobile phone and replaced the battery with a dead one. If she calls Mark over the weekend, it will only be from her home phone. I would be able to eavesdrop on their conversations at the weekends. On Saturday morning, I observed that she had dressed in a skirt and shirt. As I prepared to leave for the golf course, I noted her attire with interest. I also considered the possibility that she was wearing underwear beneath her clothing. I observed myself with some concern, as I had not put on my customary golf trousers and shirt by 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. The departure time arrived, and since I exhibited no indications of leaving, I could discern the mental processes occurring within her, as she sought to rationalize her need to depart. Eventually, she became irritated and addressed me, inquiring as to whether I was playing golf that day. The doorbell rang, and I regarded it with bewilderment before proceeding to ascertain who was there. She opened the door and expressed astonishment, inquiring as to how I had allowed my sister to enter the premises. "Miriam," she continued, "what is this? Is this how your sister behaves when she is driven by avarice?" Miriam inquired, as she proceeded to enter the residence, where she was greeted with warmth. I was greeted with enthusiasm. I was pleased to see her, and I replied with a smile. I had not anticipated her visit. My husband had invited her earlier in the week, suggesting that we spend the weekend together. We had not seen each other for a long time, so I was eager to accept the invitation. Miriam and I are quite close. Despite the distance, she lived 200 miles away, we spoke frequently on the phone. It is wonderful that she is here. He then addressed Miriam, who in turn turned to me. "This is excellent, Mac. Now I see why you are not playing golf. Nothing is more essential than giving my wife quality time with her sister." He proceeded to speak with them, and then invited us out to breakfast. He then looked at them again and said, "Actually, Miriam, you might want to wear something more formal than your jeans, but you look great just the way you are." She then blushed as she remembered why she had dressed like that, but she recovered quickly. "Why don't you help Miriam? Please assist her in transporting her belongings to the guest room while she changes attire. I will only make a brief telephone call." I observed her traversing the corridor, and approximately a minute later, I heard muffled exclamations. She emerged, carrying her unresponsive telephone, and stated angrily, "The batteries are dead." That is truly unfortunate. I empathized with her, but reassured her that the landline would suffice. She spoke rapidly, and I was left with the impression that the matter was of little consequence. I inquired about the location of our breakfast plans. I spent the remainder of the weekend engaging with the sisters, ensuring they had an enjoyable experience. When Miriam departed, I was left with the impression that she had enjoyed her time. On Sunday afternoon, she embraced me and expressed gratitude. She informed me that I have a remarkable spouse and urged me to prioritize his well-being. This remark evoked a moment of emotional vulnerability, yet she soon regained her composure and extended a reassuring embrace. She reiterated her confidence and stated that she had made arrangements to contact Mark over the weekend. I was not opposed to the idea of the call being placed from our landline. I proceeded to record the conversation and retired for the evening. Upon reviewing the recording, I discovered that the call had been initiated earlier that Sunday morning. "Mark, you have been avoiding me. I am aware of your whereabouts. I attempted to contact you on several occasions on Saturday, but my calls were redirected to voicemail. I extend my sincerest apologies for this inconvenience. My sister's unexpected visit to the city on Saturday morning, coupled with the unavailability of my phone, prevented me from reaching you. Mark, I am aware that you departed on Saturday afternoon, but I was unable to contact you on that day. Regarding today, Mark, I had the opportunity to spend time with him as he showed us around the city. However, my sister's unexpected visit for the weekend has created a situation where I am unable to leave her. We have not had the chance to see each other in several months, and I am eager to resume our usual interactions. Mark, I feel somewhat absurd remaining at the lake house for the entirety of the day with my instrument in hand, awaiting your arrival. Do you ever consider anything other than your instrument? Mark is unharmed. I comprehend my position in this situation. Let us refrain from engaging in a dispute over this matter. I must depart. I do not wish for Mac to discover me unprepared. Their discussion impeded me. Their frustration seemed to be reaching a boiling point, and I believed they had inflicted a significant blow to their relationship. I hoped that simply checking their emails would suffice on Monday. I discovered I am seeking confirmation of my assessment, Mark. Is this week still the scheduled time? I do not believe it is. Mark, this situation is becoming overly complex, and I am experiencing feelings of annoyance. Furthermore, Mark has been remarkably kind to me recently, and I am experiencing feelings of guilt for engaging in activities behind his back. I believe we need to put an end to this. Mark, I must ask you to refrain from making that assertion one more time. I am serious, this matter is concluded. Mark, I must admit that I am somewhat disappointed. You are still an attractive woman, but I understand your perspective. Perhaps this is for the best. I do not wish to lose Bobby, either, but I hope that we can maintain a friendship. We will remain friends, but not with the benefits I had previously provided. I had already caused sufficient issues in their relationship to cause it to end. Now, I only needed to complete the second part of my strategy. And returned home that evening, sad and confused. I observed her to be crying on one or two occasions. I did not want to pry, but I felt that I should have ignored her mood entirely. I inquired as to her well-being, concerned that she appeared to be off her game. I asked if she was having trouble at work. She answered, avoiding my question, that it was nothing serious. I surmised that she was probably just in a bad mood. I acknowledged her assertion that her emotional state was hormonal. I permitted her a period of solitude to recuperate, yet I privately rejoiced, certain that she was grieving the dissolution of her relationship with Mark. Despite her decision to end the affair, I empathized with her and invested a great deal of emotional energy in her relationships. I was unable to the dissolution of the relationship should be experienced without a sense of loss. Her demeanor was comforting, she would not be as sad if she hadn't decided to stop it. However, I could not shake the feeling that Mark would not react similarly. He is probably having a good time with Bobby. The next morning, I had a smear test and felt I experienced a notable improvement in my emotional state throughout the day. I observed no emails between Mark and her, which served to reinforce my hypothesis that neither of them had experienced any change of heart. This gave me a growing sense of accomplishment. Everything was proceeding according to plan. That evening, after dinner, I proceeded to my study. I was holding another Edgar Allan Poe book on my lap. She inquired about my reading material. I informed her that it was The Fall of the House of Usher. She then proceeded to cuddle up to me. She asked if it was okay for her to disturb me briefly. I simply wanted her to be aware of what, I have a wonderful husband, she stated earnestly, looking me in the eye. You have been extremely kind to me over the past few weeks, and I consider myself extremely fortunate to have you. I was deeply moved by these words, and I knew I had succeeded. I had been waiting for this moment. I gazed at her, waiting to hear her response. What she would say next was unclear, as she went silent. I caught a glimpse of shame on her face, her eyes appeared to be damp. "I don't deserve you," she cried. "No," I answered calmly, "it is I who do not deserve you." Then I reached into the desk drawer and said, "I don't deserve it." My tone was sharp, and I was responding to her. The images from her motel meeting with Mark were now on her lap. She looked at me, perplexed by the change in my tone. Eventually, she comprehended what I had given her, but as she focused on the photographs and comprehended what they portrayed, she began to cry. "Oh God, no," she said when she realized what I then proceeded to present her with a copy of the divorce papers that my lawyer had filed earlier that day. She expressed her surprise, "But I was thinking about us, about you and me. Is there no way we can remain together?" I interrupted her abruptly, handing her another bundle of papers. "In case you're interested in Mark, here's a copy. In addition to the letter I wrote to Bobby that evening, I also drafted a letter to your sister Miriam, in which I explained the rationale behind my decision to initiate divorce proceedings." She expressed her anguish and wept once more. "I am perplexed by your recent actions. Throughout the previous few weeks, you had been kind and compassionate. I am astonished to observe your current demeanor. I have endeavored to elucidate the circumstances that have transpired. When you initiated your clandestine relationship, you effectively terminated my affection for you. Consequently, I have spent the preceding weeks concluding this liaison with Mark. My objective was to facilitate your comprehension of the ramifications of your actions. The extent of your loss was a consequence of your betrayal of me. My objective was to exact retribution for the wrongs you had committed against me. From my perspective, the plan was executed with precision, and I was overcome with emotion before departing. I placed the prose storybook I had been reading on top of the other documents, and the text the document was still open for Amato's work, and I used the marker to highlight Mantra's family motto, "Nobody can insult me without consequences." The following section describes my upbringing in a loving but financially constrained household. My siblings include 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. I am the middle child. Due to financial constraints, I began working at a young age, despite the fact that many individuals perceived me as a highly intelligent youth. The majority of the labor I performed was arduous and challenging, yet it provided me with the financial resources to cover my expenses at the local educational institution. I provided my semen and blood to Celeste, with whom I had a romantic relationship that began in 10th grade. After 6 weeks of nearly it is noteworthy that Celeste was an extremely creative lover, with one notable exception: her anus was secured by a loud latch, rendering it off-limits. Despite this, I never inquired about the rationale behind her insistence on me working 32 hours per week, which was sufficient to qualify for additional benefits. This commitment consumed nearly all of my free time. Additionally, I enrolled in 14 credit hours of evening courses. Celeste was employed at the office of an insurance company. Despite combining our earnings, the costs of education and living expenses prevented us from saving any money. To survive, we had to remain optimistic and hopeful for any chance opportunities that might arise. When financial constraints seemed insurmountable, I considered enlisting in the military, as the benefits described in the bill for military personnel appeared to be the most advantageous long-term option. The bill for military personnel was a statute passed in 1944 that provided educational scholarships and other veterans' benefits to those who participated in the armed services during World War II. Celeste informed me of her pregnancy a month after I joined the educational camp. She also stated that her parents agreed to assist with the baby when the time came. I was young and naive. I was so distraught at the time that I did not question her motives. It is worth noting that Celeste gave birth to our child after we had been married for 2 years. Had the child been female, we would have chosen the name Gloria. We had already decided on the name Daryl Thomas because it was a boy. I was served with divorce papers less than a month after the birth. At the time, I was still in the military, far from home. Celeste demanded no alimony or child support from me during the divorce proceedings. A copy of the birth certificate was attached to her statement. We are in monochrome. The document declared that I was no longer the father of a son called Daryl Thomas Solomon. Instead, it identified Celeste's colleague Wendell Putt as the child's father. Darrell Thomas departed, and the infant was renamed Wendell Put Jr. The divorce did not include any visitation terms. I was no longer officially the boy's father. My colleagues convinced me that losing such a woman was the greatest thing for me. It was challenging to argue against their perspective, but I found myself struggling to accept the reality of the situation. Celeste and I have not spoken since the divorce. Since the day I was presented with divorce papers, I have experienced a gradual restoration of my confidence and faith in women. Despite the lack of tangible outcomes, I have managed to form a relationship with a woman who genuinely cares for me. I met her at a neighborhood gathering, where she was introduced to me as the stepsister of one of my neighbors. At the time, I had minimal familiarity with her, and despite her previous attendance at similar events, we did not interact extensively on that occasion. I was preoccupied with other matters. Given my emotional state following the dissolution of my marriage, I was initially reluctant to initiate contact. However, I was eventually prompted to do so by a question from the woman in question, who inquired as to whether I was a military officer. I replied in the affirmative, and was then asked whether I was a civilian. I confirmed this, and was then asked how long I had been stationed there. I replied that it had been approximately 9 months, and was then asked whether I was attending the event on my own. I confirmed that I was, and was then asked whether I had any friends there. Her conversational approach was straightforward and informal. I found her tone of voice to be pleasant and easy to respond to. I was initially taken aback by her abrupt change in demeanor, but I quickly realized that she was simply trying to be friendly. She then inquired about my residence, noting that I did not live in the neighborhood. My sister had invited me to come there. She then directed my attention to a woman who did not resemble her. She responded in a humorous tone, "Do you think you're the only one who can be shy? All right, Miss Nameless. How about we leave, grab some dinner, and watch a movie? I'm Dale." I presented myself, meeting the businesslike but suitably suave suggestion, which under certain conditions may lead to an interesting continuation for both of us. "That sounds good to me. Dale, could you please call me?" My new acquaintance offered, leaning in and nudging my arm with her elbow. That's what, as previously stated, we proceeded to cohabitate. Dale was engaged in academic pursuits and prepared to take the bar examination in order to become a lawyer. In the interim, following the completion of my bachelor's degree, I was employed as a manager in a distribution center. We leased a residence in a conventional residential area. We occasionally took vacations and weekend trips to Las Vegas. Our life together seemed fairly comfortable and good despite the fact that none of us had ever discussed marriage. I must admit that I paid little attention to what happened shortly after accepting an invitation to another neighborhood gathering. I spent some time in the backyard. They were unable to take a day off this time, so I found myself there. The only individual I was obliged to avoid was our neighbor, Bevan. She was openly flirtatious and attempted to seduce me. This annoyed me, as I had no objection to her behavior, but I was offended by her attempts to spend time alone with me. I offered her reassurance, and I shrewdly avoided Bevorn at that gathering. Randy and Marley, the newcomers to our community, who prepared this entertainment for the neighbors, were dressed pretty daringly that evening. In Malia's case, she appeared to be without a bra. It seemed unlikely that the line of her underwear could be seen through her skirt, which terminated at the mid-thigh. She held herself with confidence, rubbing her large bosom against everyone there, men and women alike. In contrast, Randy seemed unconcerned about his wife's provocative behavior. After a while, it appeared that the party was coming to an end. A number of males were no longer visible in the backyard. I decided that I would allow sufficient time to meet the needs of a polite visitor at such an occasion. Randy was just ushering one of the last males into the home when I tapped him on the shoulder to say goodbye. He took a turn around, and I inquired as to whether he was prepared to go. I informed him that things were getting exciting in the bedroom. He then made a suggestive gesture towards me. I replied with a greeting and expressed my welcome to the neighborhood. I suggested that he tell Marley hello and that we should leave. I proceeded to exit the house through the front entrance, accompanied by Randy. As we walked by one of the rooms, I heard sounds of an intimate nature that were clearly audible. Randy's smile became more pronounced. With the passage of each year, the door behind which I observed a group of unclothed males standing became increasingly visible. It was evident that they were eagerly awaiting their turn. Even in the corridor, the audible expressions of arousal and the sounds of flesh against flesh, as well as Marley's vocalizations, were distinctly discernible. It was as if she were a highly skilled pornographic performer. I simply smiled and proceeded towards the exit. Upon exiting the house, I was uncertain of what would transpire. I could have perhaps prepared more effectively for the challenges that lay ahead that evening. "You are a disgraceful individual. How could you do such a thing?" Dee demanded, entering the home with a sense of urgency. "How could I possibly desire sexual intimacy with our new neighbor, Bevan?" He asserted that every man in their group had engaged in sexual activity with Marley. In regard to her assertion, I must respectfully disagree. I did not engage with Bevan and did not interact with Marley for the first hour. However, as I was departing, I overheard her consulting with Randy. In stark contrast to her claim, Bon informed me that Marley had admitted to her that I had departed from Ree's bedroom with a self-satisfied demeanor. In light of these events, I advise you to take immediate action to rectify the situation. I suggest that you relocate to the guest bedroom. She indicated that she would not be sleeping with me that night. That evening marked the beginning of the end of our relationship. After that, things never returned to their previous state. Andy and Marley were discovered to be swingers. On that day, they were encouraging new individuals to join their group by providing free samples. After 2 months of living under the same roof but in isolation, I realized that it was evident that our relationship was in a state of decline. If we were to pursue a dissolution of the union, this would have been the optimal time to do so. We had discussed the prospect of marriage and the creation of a genuine family unit on numerous occasions. However, we had not progressed beyond this point, particularly due to the lack of children in our relationship. The only aspect that took me by surprise was how these feelings of love rapidly transformed into hatred, based solely on the words of an individual she professed to dislike. If Dean was genuinely mentally unstable, perhaps I should be grateful that we separated when we did. I subsequently found alternative accommodation and relocated, although I was not surprised. Upon receiving a message from Bevan on my phone, inquiring as to whether I would be interested in meeting with her, I did not respond. I did not contact her again, as I did not require the company of another individual with whom I had a proclivity for devious and nymphomaniacal behavior. I had been living alone for over a year at the time. My heart was jolted when I received the message, as I had not removed the contact details from my phone at that time. On that Saturday evening, the phone buzzed, and the number in question appeared on the screen. I was uncertain as to how I should proceed. My stomach churned, my pulse quickened, and my palms sweated. I was unsure of her intentions. It would have been more straightforward to send a message after a few unsuccessful attempts. The phone fell silent for a brief period before ringing, unmistakably proclaiming its arrival. "Hello, Neil. I was wondering if you would like to meet up sometime. I owe you an apology." An apology was forthcoming, and the author expressed a desire to meet in person. However, the author was reluctant to do so, citing the fact that he had already broken up with her and was attempting to move on. He questioned the rationale behind providing her with the opportunity to clear her conscience. Despite still harboring strong feelings for her, the author's intuition advised against resuming their relationship. He responded with a polite acknowledgement but ultimately declined the invitation. This response prompted an urgent follow-up query. I was prompted to inquire as to why I did not respond to her text messages. I had already informed her that I was no longer interested in pursuing a relationship with her. I could have simply stated that she was not worth my time or that she was insane. Instead, I chose to remain silent. On Sunday morning, I discovered a plethora of new text messages from Dee. I had not responded to her messages because I did not want to meet with her. It became evident that she had intended to divulge a plethora of information, including details that she had intended to share with me. A multitude of text messages began to accumulate on my phone. It was apparent that Randy and Marley had recorded their illicit activities in the bedroom, as well as any other available footage. Someone acting as a divorce lawyer identified the video and took legal action. The video analysis presented in court identified the individuals involved in the incident on the fateful day. I made it clear that I was not one of the participants in the swinger party. As a result, the other party has come to believe me and expressed regret for her actions and statements. Despite having not kept track of her since our breakup, I elected to reciprocate her own bitter medicine. I wrote, "It does not matter anymore." I was informed that subsequent to my departure, she became one of the county's most expedient individuals. I am confident that I could never coexist with a woman like that in a state of felicity. The telephone rang almost instantaneously. Dale, this is false. Who did you hear this from? From, I'm not a prostitute. Allow her to be angry, perhaps it will be helpful to her. I did not answer my phone, which began ringing again after a few minutes. I then turned it off. Let us discuss the possibility that I have touched a nerve. Perhaps I should keep track of the messages I have received after my comment about her erratic behavior. My phone was flooded with text messages. Furthermore, numerous voicemails were left unanswered. It was evident that she was attempting to protect her reputation. It was implausible that this was the case, yet I was compelled to entertain the possibility. The messages and phone calls persisted for 2 weeks. Fortunately, the final message was similar to this one. I offer my sincerest apologies and acknowledge that everything is clear to me. I made a bold assertion that you were unable to refute. I have since recognized that you treated me in a similar manner. I regret allowing you to influence me in a negative way. I am going to refrain from contacting you. However, I still have feelings for you. A week later, I agreed to meet with D for a drink or two. Even explaining to myself proved challenging. The most recent text message was likely to have softened my resolve to cease all communication with her. A part of me was screaming, run or don't, but the main idiot insisted that he had everything under control. He then arrived at our meeting fully armed. She dressed conservatively throughout our relationship. However, the push, the bra and low-cut blouse accentuated her voluminous breasts. It appeared that she had deliberately chosen this ensemble to expose her nipples, which were visible through the fabric. Dale's demeanor became more rigid. She commented, "My eyes are up here," and stated that she found his eyes attractive. He replied, struggling to avert his gaze and lift his eyes upward, "You went. Given the circumstances, it would be discourteous of me to ignore these attractions. How have you been doing?" "I am doing well. What about you?" "I am doing well, thank you." "It is still too early to say what kind of drink you would like." "It is white wine that has remained unchanged." "Do you believe this skirt is too short?" she inquired, smoothing her thighs as if by chance. She seemed to be holding her legs together, but then, her entire arsenal was at the ready. The sight of any woman's inner thigh was having a powerful effect on my hormones. It may not be appropriate for a church, but it is ideal for a bar like this. "Are you a frequent visitor here?" I inquired. "It's the first time. I was hoping to find someone similar to you." "What about you? You probably come here on a regular basis." "Yeah, it's my favorite spot for picking up girls. There is typically a wide range of options available." This remark, made in a casual tone, prompted an involuntary reaction, which I observed and responded to with a smile. "I have some reason to believe you're one of those individuals who are excessively loyal." C screamed, "Run." I concede that I allowed myself to indulge in some transient gratifications and a few one-night stands. However, I was ill-prepared for the advent of new, long-term relationships. I finally decided that honesty was the best policy, particularly in regard to long-term relationships, especially with D. However, I must admit that my heart is not yet ready to trust any woman. It could be months, or even years, before I am prepared to endure such anguish again. At these words, my eyes clouded with sadness, I replied, "I'm so sorry, Dale. Would you be interested in a friends with benefits arrangement so that you don't forget about me?" Perhaps she. I became aware that she was holding me. I needed to purchase condoms. I uttered a brief, inarticulate sound, and she flinched again and began to say, "But what about you? You don't need them." She shook her head, and I heard her say, "Okay, fine. At your place or mine?" She lowered her voice, breathing heavily, and leaned toward me across the table. She said, "Let's go to your place. That way, I can leave when I need to." Upon my return, Dean permitted me entry. She was already attired in a short, appealing robe. As soon as I removed my coat, she, in a manner reminiscent of a magician, opened the folds of her robe, revealing, of course, nothing underneath. I was almost blinded by her naked, bronzed figure, which was just as alluring and arousing as I remembered. "I am your sexual toy. Tell me what you want." "You want, and I'll do it," she moaned, her voice altered by lust, low and husky. Dean embodied the ideal man, combining sensuality, passion, attentiveness, and impatience. However, this was not sufficient. I engaged in her allure a minimum of twice a week. I am aware of your desire for us to reunite. I am sorry for the dissolution of our relationship. What we had previously was no longer fulfilling for me. I informed her that I might require assistance in understanding the reasons behind this change. I have become emotionally distant, and I am reluctant to mislead you. The sexual intimacy is satisfactory, and your attitude is commendable. However, I am unable to rekindle the love we once shared. Dale, I have observed that she sighs in response. She is not the same person I knew before. I am willing to give you more time to find yourself. I still blame myself for how I treated you. I stopped calling her, but she did not. She kept me updated. Despite my initial refusal, she continued to occasionally extend invitations for me to stay the night. However, I was not interested, and I came to recognize the necessity of professional assistance to address the depression that had taken hold of me. Dave, my psychologist consultant, was able to achieve some success in persuading me to join him for a few sessions. During those sessions, he was not present. She was generally soft and persistent in her efforts to identify the underlying issues and contradictions between us. It became evident that she had never truly trusted me, which prompted her to return home in tears. As a result, she took another step forward and began conducting her own private consultations. Gradually, we resumed our friends with benefits meetings, and I began to consider the possibility of progressing in our relationship over time. To the point of rekindling serious relationships, I had been divorced from Celeste for 5 years when one day she left a message for me in my parents' house. I waited a few days before calling her back, despite having absolutely no reason to talk to her again. However, my natural curiosity got the better of me. Celeste, this is Dale. You called me. Thanks for calling back. That was the semi-forgotten yet so familiar voice of my ex-wife. My wife Wendell and I would like to discuss a matter of great importance with you. We would be grateful if we could arrange a meeting at your convenience. If you would like, we could treat you to dinner. I have agreed to meet at a cafe near my home. They decided to join me. Celeste was accompanied by a man she introduced as her husband, Wendell. She was dressed in a stylish manner and appeared to be well-groomed. After the waitress took our orders and left, Celeste and her husband exchanged glances, as if gathering resolve before a trial. Celeste then produced an envelope and placed it on the table in front of her. Dale, I have a confession to make, and a request of you. When I gave birth to my child, you were still married. In any case, I identified Wendell as the child's biological father. However, you recently discovered that this information was inaccurate. In summary, Dale is your child's biological father. My heartbeat accelerated, and I felt my stomach tighten. Do you have any comments regarding this matter? Celeste inquired, her expression slightly frowning as she watched my reaction. What is your request? I managed to stammer. I am writing to request your assistance in a matter of great importance. Wendell, my young grandson, requires a bone marrow donor, and I was hoping you would agree to provide this vital service. I have here the DNA test that shows Wendell is not the boy's father. The only other person who could be his father is you. I am enclosing the DNA test and the doctor's report about young Wendell. The enclosed envelope contains the results of a DNA test that will determine whether you are a suitable donor for Wendell. As I am not a compatible donor, the doctors have stated that you are likely to be a match for your son. I donated my sperm to a sperm bank long before we met. I have fathered numerous children, some of whom I have never met. Why do you believe your child deserves more of my time and genetic material than they do? The child in question deserves more of my time and a piece of my body than the others. Unlike the others, he was conceived naturally. Does that mean anything to her? She insisted that it did not. In my opinion, the child is no different than any other child that could have been mine at some point. I have absolutely no emotional attachment to any of them. If that is all she has, then it is now time for me to return to my professional duties. I ask that you refrain from insulting my wife or interfering in this situation, which is taking place across from us. Celeste, please do not squeeze his hand. Do not respond to him, Wendell. If he wishes to communicate in such a manner, we should not stoop to his level. Tell me, did you succeed in taking that individual up on his offer? I was unable to do so until I discovered her engaging in the act with. Subsequently, I was granted permission to do so. However, I did not derive any pleasure from the experience, particularly given that she lacked the requisite proficiency. Wendell, that is not accurate. Celesta interjected, stating that she had never been unfaithful to him and that he had no romantic partner. In response, Dale burst into laughter and began to ridicule Celesta, asserting that her actions did not constitute infidelity. Celeste's face was blotchy, and she was practically screaming, "You, Dale! How could you turn your back on your son in cold blood? Here's what I'll tell you. I'll find out if there's a way to check if any of my potential but currently unknown children are sick. If there is one, and his mother isn't alive, I'll help that child." Child, I indicated that the conversation was over by standing up. I informed her that she needed help and headed for the door. We hadn't taken more than a few steps when Wendell spoke, in a tone that was both conciliar and inclusive, to Dale. He said, "Dale, we need your help. We need you to talk to us. What do we need to do for that?" I presented my conditions and I then proceeded to name my son's birth certificate to list me as his father and subsequently change his name to Daryl Thomas Solomon. In return, I would consider checking if I was compatible with him until that point was reached. However, I made it clear that I would not tolerate any further contact from them after that point. Despite their pleas for me to stay and engage in further discussion, I was unsure of how to proceed. "Ice, what are your intentions?" "Dale, I believe you are a kind and benevolent woman. Will you assist a young man named Daryl? It appears that you cannot fully trust me. Good day. I am sorry if I have offended you. If you do not trust me, will you marry me? This situation could have unfavorable consequences. You are aware that I inquired about your intentions. I considered my future prospects with United. I had made considerable progress in therapy and had developed a strong affection for her. Given these circumstances, I was inclined to accept her proposal." I finally replied, and her expression brightened. I inquired about the possibility of arranging a new birth certificate and documentation for a name change. She replied that she would be pleased to assist me. The evening's activities in the bedroom were the most satisfying we had experienced since we began our relationship. The following day, I was engaged in fulfilling some responsibilities, but the documents had already been prepared and delivered by courier. The instructions for Celeste and Wendell indicated that they were to finalize all papers with a notary and then contact us to arrange the next meeting. The gift also included a DNA testing kit, which I used to establish whether Daryl was truly my child. Another day passed before we met with them again. "It's fantastic that you joined us today. Did you bring the prepared materials as agreed?" Dee asked briskly, behaving really professionally. A swab from Daryl's wind was submitted. Celeste quickly corrected herself, stumbling briefly, and I immediately interjected. "You will not submit these documents until all medical procedures have been completed. I have a list of questions for you both to answer. We must decide how medical expenses will be covered. As far as I know, you also have a 2-year-old. A year has elapsed. Old daughter, yes. Last month, Audrey celebrated her 2nd birthday. When will you go through the testing?" "As soon as my consultant tells me it's fine." That evening, I gave specific instructions for preparing the documents. This defies my common sense. They spoke to me with skepticism, but I believe in you, Neil. For our sake, I hope your plans are not only legal but also successful. I mean, I did say I loved you. Right, you will soon fall in love with me just as much. Continue to dream. You'll never catch up to me on this." Mr. D burst out laughing. Another day passed, and we all reconvened around the table. Table for negotiations. I extend my gratitude to you for attending despite my uncertainty regarding your assistance. I commenced the dialogue with a slight frown. Please, Dale, refrain from making such statements. Celeste whimpered as she pleaded for your aid, as her condition has significantly deteriorated. Daryl is present. As is his sister, Audrey. I posed a question that they did not seem to anticipate. Indeed, she swiftly turned to respond. While she does exhibit similar behaviors to her brother, it is unclear what the rationale is for separating them. I intervened to prevent her from asking a question. If you wish for me to grant permission for the bone marrow transplant, you must provide me with complete custody of both children. In my opinion, it would be too challenging to separate Wendell and Celeste, who had transformed into pillars of salt at the opposite end of the table. The other parties were rolling their eyes and gaping in disbelief. It was evident that they did not believe it was a good idea to have visitation rights for the next 2 years. It was my opinion that allowing them some time to adjust to their new parents would be beneficial. Wendell was the first to think it through. His face contorted, and he jumped out of his seat. He yelled, "What? I will not let you steal my daughter. Sorry, friend, but you were the first one to steal my child. What's the difference?" I gave a shrug. I did not take him. Celeste informed me that I was his father, which was a rather unexpected revelation. It is interesting to consider how one might categorize an individual who deceives another in such a manner. I was taken aback by this turn of events. Wendell did not respond immediately but instead slumped back into his chair and stared off to the side. I pressed him further by asking him to clarify his stance on the matter. He responded by saying that he had indeed known that she was married when he began sleeping with her. This response was met with a stammer and a nod. It seemed as though he was attempting to justify his actions by suggesting that it was acceptable to steal someone else's wife. His response was met with my own observation that his morals were questionable. "You two were made for each other," lips curling in a sarcastic grin. I then slammed my palm against the table. "Do you require assistance in obtaining the children?" "Both children are in my custody." He has already completed all of the necessary documentation. Celeste swiveled, barely holding back her tears. "How could you possibly be so heartless?" I snapped. "Look in the mirror. There you can see how heartlessness looks. I'm not going to repeat myself. Bring the prepared documents." Furthermore, the children were present. When the conversation between Wendell and Celeste resumed, they were observed to be sobbing and clutching each other's shoulders. After the meeting concluded, there was a notable absence of discourse. I did, however, perceive a few expressions of concern. She directed her attention to the details of the negotiations, which appeared to evoke a profound sense of unease. It is evident that this aspect of my personality was previously unknown to me. She proceeded to convey her impression that I possess a considerable reservoir of repressed anger. This assertion may indeed be valid, as Dee had previously suggested. I was experiencing a buildup of emotions that I was unable to contain. Initially, I spoke in a quiet tone, but after a few minutes, I found myself shouting. The incident was so traumatic that it felt as if my heart had been ripped out of my chest. I am unsure if you can fully comprehend my feelings at that time. Even later, when I was with you, I demonstrated the same level of responsibility that I believed was appropriate, but I am uncertain if that was sufficient for you. I was treated with disregard, and my heart was subjected to another painful rupture. Now, I am being told the assertion that my son was stolen has prompted me to inquire whether you have experienced a similar situation in your life. I must admit that I have not. However, I am of the opinion that you may be correct in your assumption. I am currently experiencing a heightened emotional state. What am I thinking about? I believe it is important to take a deep breath and refrain from behaving like a child. I am thinking that perhaps I rushed this decision. Perhaps marriage is not the best choice for us. I was already beginning to get up to leave when Wendy leapt at me. She was just as loud and fierce during her speech as I was. "Please remain seated. You are not leaving." I extend my sincerest apologies. I endeavored to rectify the situation and acknowledge that I erred in judgment. I am cognizant of this and I am gratified that you have recognized my accountability. My sole intention was to facilitate an open dialogue. I am gratified that this has been achieved, and I hope that you can now find some measure of respite. I am remorseful for the role that I played in this unfortunate turn of events. I must concede that I was initially reluctant to entrust you with this DNA matter, but I am now convinced that you possess a distinct advantage. I must admit that I am at a loss as to how to proceed. She then proceeded to vocalize her disquietude regarding the lack of clarity regarding the ultimate objective and the prospective course of action, particularly in light of the imminent arrival of 2 children. I implore you to pardon my apparent preoccupation, but I am of the opinion that I am justified in feeling apprehensive until such time as you elucidate your intentions. Our eyes brimmed with tears, and I swallowed the lump in my throat as I uttered an apology for my previous actions. I acknowledge the plausibility of your assertion and requested that you proceed with the aforementioned activities. I then informed DE of my subsequent request, after she had been made aware of my plan. She became visibly more cheerful. What was the result? We endeavored to surpass ourselves in the bedroom that night in preparation for another meeting. I was uncertain as to whether Celeste and Wendell would eventually acquiesce, but it only took 2 days before the children were conveyed to DS. I had never observed 2 adults weep so profusely. Da and I accompanied the children to the cafeteria and shopping mall, where we awaited further developments. Celeste was en route to the underground parking lot. I was informed approximately 15 minutes later that we had overtaken the mayor as he was departing. The children behind Audrey rushed up to Celeste and Wendell, greeting them with enthusiastic exclamations as if they were long-lost friends. Both appeared completely perplexed, as if they had aged a decade overnight. This prompted my initial question: what is the rationale behind the 2-year separation? Celeste's demeanor was noticeably distraught, her eyes red-rimmed, and her shoulders slumped. Nevertheless, Audrey was immediately drawn to her. I had no intention of pursuing guardianship. My objective was for you to demonstrate your profound attachment to your children. I stated that the documents are drafted in a manner that allows me to submit them to the court at any time until the children reach the age of 18. In the event that I discover that the children have been mistreated, I will seek to have them removed from your care through the legal system. She inquired as to whether I still intended to undergo the medical examination. I informed her that I had taken the exam the day after our initial meeting. Darrell and I are so incompatible that, as much as possible, my mismatched blood type immediately disqualified me from being a donor for the boy. This further demonstrates that I am not the boy's biological father. Wendell was stunned and perplexed by the news. Celeste, you have been uncooperative and unhelpful throughout this process. Wendell looked stunned and perplexed. Celeste, on the other hand, screamed, "This is possible, so you're now a medical expert too." I retorted sarcastically, "I suggest you find his biological father and damn well hire someone suitable." Due to the constraints of privacy laws, I was unable to ascertain the identity of the individual who facilitated Wendell's recovery. However, I am aware that he spent a considerable amount of time in the hospital, approximately 11 weeks, before being discharged and returning home with Celeste and his nominal father, Wendell. They maintained communication with them in the hope of a positive outcome. I fulfilled my commitment and proposed to D, and we are currently engaged. However, there are still some challenges to address. Dave, our personal counselor, has conducted several sessions to assist me in dealing with suppressed anger issues. I have been assisting D and accepting him as he is, and we already have 2 daughters, Wendell and Celeste. They attempted a couple more times to conceive with their younger son, Wendell, but unfortunately, it did not result in a successful pregnancy. Wendell, the younger son, now has 3 sisters, the best set of twins one could hope for regarding my presumed children for whom I once donated my sperm. However, I have not yet found any of them, if they exist at all, on these DNA matching websites. Nevertheless, I believe they will be found. It is anticipated that the matter will be resolved shortly, should the necessity arise. However, it is hoped that the acrimonious exchanges that have characterized previous interactions can be avoided on this occasion. DS9 has destroyed all the documentation received from Celeste. While it is acknowledged that the actions of DS9 may have been perceived as inappropriate, it is believed that they were justified. The author would like to express gratitude to those who have taken the time to read today's account. If you have enjoyed this post, please consider showing your appreciation by clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel if you have not already done so. Should you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, the author would encourage you to do so. However, it is requested that you exercise caution.